first I want to finish the discussion of despair. Remember, I left you with this kind of cliffhanger to figure out why you were all in despair, or almost all, anyway. Anyone who if you haven't been in despair and pulled out of it by a defining commitment, you're in despair. And I might add, because somebody just asked me a question right before I started talking, which showed some not quite understanding, because you could still be in despair even if you had a defining commitment. You ought to know that. Who is the we know from the course has a defining commitment and is in despair anyway? Good? Kierkegaard. No, well, who knows? I mean, that's too hard to say. Yeah. A night of resignation, right? And I was thinking of the French woman. She's surely in despair. She gives this moan of utter sadness. That's not just ordinary sadness. We'll come back to that in a minute. And she's in despair. The only people who aren't in despair are people who were in despair, have a defining commitment, and have faith. That is, don't go into resignation, but stay in the defining commitment. Now, and while I'm at it, why don't I explain something else, which I was going to explain later, because it seems silly to go back and repeat it. That we have to distinguish despair from anguish. Somebody asked me about that after class. That's important. They are really almost opposites. Despair is the experience we talked about last time, that you can't relate the factors. You can't get them together. They're a contradiction. And on your own, nobody can get them together. And therefore, another way to put that's why everybody's in despair. I'll come back to that. That let's get anguish taken care of. Anguish is the positive feeling that the night of faith has. When the night of faith has a defining commitment, doesn't flee from it and make it safe in resignation, but holds on to it, seeing the sword over the head of the beloved and getting more and more involved as if it's the surest thing of all, that's anguish. Remember, anguish is the very criterion of a night of faith. The night of faith also, suspending the ethical, which every night of faith does, because once you've got a defining commitment, you've got a higher authority in your life than the ethical, which may not be calling you right now to do something that you wish you never would have to do and couldn't stand yourself after you did it, but might at any time call you to do something like that. And so the person who has a defining commitment is also in anguish of the possible teleologic. So I guess put it this way, there's an anguish over the possible sword falling, which is over the head of the beloved. That's the vulnerability. And there's the anguish of the possible call to go against the ethical at any time might come. And that's the anguish of problems 1 and 2. I think that's all I want to say about that. So, and in the anguish, I need to finish. Bliss is obviously a very, very miserable feeling. Anguish is a tension which you're in, but it goes with bliss. It's not an awful feeling. It's just a feeling that, boy, things are weird. There are things I'm doing that I can't understand how I'm doing them or why I'm doing them, but I know I have to do them feeling. And you couldn't have bliss without that. Okay. And everyone who's got an unconditional commitment and is a night of faith is in anguish. And everyone who doesn't have an unconditional commitment or has one but doesn't have faith is in despair. Get that all cleared up. But now we're ready to talk about the issue which is where we left off. I just want to make sure now that is where we are. Yeah, okay. Now, we were just saying, why should we believe we're all in despair? Why not say, look, not me, I'm getting the most out of my possibilities, I'm happy, I don't feel anguish, but I don't need to, and I don't feel despair because everything is going extremely well. Well, the answer to that is on your handout, and it's very sort of brilliant and ingenious, and I think probably convincing. So let's read it. This is on the same side of the handout as the chart. And I'm quoting Kierkegaard from the other translation, just because I already had it on the chart. I didn't want to do the page all over again. There's no important difference. So the common view, I'm going to read it, overlooks the fact that when compared with illness, despair differs dialectically from what one usually calls sickness, because it's sickness of the spirit. And this dialectical, dialectic is this funny word. I don't really know how to explain what he means when he slings it around. He talks about the dialectic of eternity in a minute. Does anybody know why he keeps saying dialectical? I don't either. I bet it's something Hegelian. It makes absolutely no difference. You could just cross it out every time you come across it. I think that's a good idea. Then it makes more sense. And this aspect, properly understood, brings further thousands under the category of despair. If at any time a physician is convinced that so-and-so is in good health, and then later that person becomes ill, then the physician may well be right about this person's having been well at the time, but now sick. But despair isn't like that. Once despair appears, what is apparent is that the person was in despair. In fact, it's never possible at any time to decide anything about a person who's not saved through having been in despair. That's what we've been talking about. For when whatever causes a person to despair occurs, it is immediately evident that he's been in despair his whole life. That's the interesting move. When someone gets a fever, on the other hand, it cannot possibly be said that now it is evident that he's had fever all his life. But despair is a characteristic of the spirit. It's related to the eternal, and there's something of the eternal in it. I just got rid of dialectic. Okay. Now, what goes on here? Does my voice sound too loud to you or just to me? It sounds okay to you. Okay, then I won't mess with it. So now what's going on there? Well, you've got to understand more the phenomenology, the description of the feeling of despair. And then you'll understand what he's saying. What is it to say that despair has got eternity in it? Well, he says it means that when you're in despair, you realize you always were and always will be. But what is that? Well, now, I think to figure that out, you have to take a sort of running start and not just use despair in a kind of sloppy way, but realize it has a very technical meaning for Kierkegaard, and probably really it does. Despair is a very, very special mood, and you want to distinguish it from, say, being sad. If you're sad, melancholy, as people used to say, then you know that it's temporary, that you'll get over it, that you've been sad before, and after that you're happy again. Now, it could be worse. If something awful happens to you, and you're so miserable that you don't think that the rest of your life would ever be the same, and you could ever be happy again, because this has made it impossible for you to be happy ever again, then you're really miserable. I don't know what the word for that is. That's really bad. That's about as bad as it can get. Short of despair. That's not despair. Now, the tricky thing is to understand that. Despair is the experience that it's always been impossible for things to work out for you. They didn't just start being bad. They were just plain bad all along. Your way of relating to the factors is bad. It won't work. It can't give you a meaningful life. So when you run into despair, you get an experience that your whole life, your life isn't working now. You get that experience. That's too bad. That's sad. Maybe that's miserable. But you get the more experience, and moreover, the kind of life you got could never work, never make you happy, never give you a fulfillment. Now, we're lucky we have the French woman, because in the movie, when she makes this moan of utter sadness when she's looking in her mirror in the bathroom, in the hotel at the end of the movie, what does she understand? Does she just understand that, oh boy, it's not going to work out with the Japanese guy, isn't that too bad, and I have to go home to my husband and keep what's really important all about me secret, isn't that too bad? But at least I've saved the German, isn't that great? Is that what she's got? A moan of utter sadness. The utter in there part is it's sadness for all the past and sadness for all the future. She's realized that she's in a kind of trap, that her life is set up so it can't work. If she gives up the German, she makes her life meaningless and loses her identity and regresses to lower nature and lower immediacy. If she holds on to the German the way she understands memory, she has the German always in front of her and she can't relate to anybody else, even somebody as utterly understanding and sexy and good-looking and lovable as the Japanese man. And that's bad news. And so, in other words, she sees her life is literally, totally hopeless. And that's despair. And now it follows, of course, from what I've just said, that if despair is really like that your life isn't working, your way of living can't make you happy and meaningful, give you a meaningful life, then what is your attitude toward your past when you were happy and everything seemed to be going well? What would have to be your attitude toward your past once you get this experience? This is the eternity in it. You weren't really happy, exactly. It must have been an illusion. If you've got an experience which says, right on the face of it, your life isn't working and it can never work, it also says, and it has never worked. You can't have one without the other. And now the pieces are all in place to see what it means to say that you are all, or almost all, in despair right now. And how it's related to discovering that you've got a disease right now. Well, if you discover you've got a disease right now, you don't have to discover that you had it all along. But if you get into despair, what do you discover? Your life is... That's right. And that's the future part. And what about the past? Your life is never hopeless at all. That's right. Your life was hopeless all along. You were in despair all along. You just repressed it, covered it up, distracted yourself, or something like that. And now what does that tell you about you right now? It's all a very brilliant and ingenious argument. Everybody sitting here right now can at any moment in their life experience despair. And then what will they understand about themselves sitting here right now? Huh? It better be clear. I'm saying it in simple words of one syllable. What will you know about your life right now if you get into despair 10 years from now? That you were in despair right now. You were just covering it up. You were under the illusion you were happy and your life was working. It couldn't be, because 10 years from now you're going to discover your life never worked and never could and never will, given the way you've set your life up. Now there's several once you see that, there's sort of footnotes to say, it may never happen to you. You may be lucky enough to get through life without ever hitting despair. Just like you may be lucky enough to get through life with your defining commitment, always safe, even though it's vulnerable, the sword will never fall. But the very fact that you could at any moment experience despair is enough to show that you're in despair right now. Right? Because if you could at any moment experience it, then you will always be able retroactively to experience it, and nothing guarantees that you aren't going to experience it some moment in the future, except what? You can talk and say, what could guarantee you that you wouldn't experience despair in the future, that it wasn't just a lucky fluke if you get by life without experiencing it? Yeah, that you're a knight of faith, and you have your defining commitment, and you've been in despair, because everybody is in despair before they get a defining commitment and before they get to be a knight of faith. So the only possible, so nothing except that could guarantee that at some future moment you may retroactively realize that you're in despair right now. And that's what he wants to convince you of. And it does seem, I think, right to follow if you believe that despair is this kind of special, retroactive and proactive, that is eternal for all time, for your life, forever in your life experience. And I think people do have that experience, and seeing the Japanese lady having it is a pretty clear case of it. Now somebody wanted to say something. You still want to say something?
feeling despair now, like we being in despair now versus our experiencing despair in the future and then like arising the past, though we were in despair, like think of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah, but once you have the experience, you don't just think maybe I was always in despair. By the nature of it, you must have been in despair right now. It's stronger than that. Because, I mean, it's this picture, you sort of see that this is the same as the defining commitment eternity, only upside down. I mean, the defining commitment eternity was you get to an X, an instant, in which your whole past is empty and your whole future is settled in terms of the person or cause that you're involved with. Well, if this X was despair, you get to the understanding that your whole past didn't work and you were miserable, and no matter how far the future goes into the future, you will always be miserable. And once you see that, it follows that no matter how good you feel now, it must have been an illusion. I mean, this isn't just a prediction or a guess. It follows from the nature of despair, according to him. And it sounds very plausible and interesting to see it that way. There was one other thing I was thinking to say it for that might help. Just a second. Well, I could give you another example from Kierkegaard that might help. Now, you need to have some kind of feel for this. I mean, maybe you'll know somebody like this, or if you don't, you might be able to make up somebody else who has some other version of this. I mean, Kierkegaard talks about a kind of person who feels that they were dealt with badly in their childhood, in whatever way. Their sibling made life miserable for them, or some other such thing. And they feel that they won't accept the world or themselves unless that gets fixed and made right. They want the past to be changed. But of course, that's a bad idea because they can't change it. What they could change is the future, and they could get over it. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to say, well, it was all right, I got over it. It's too outrageous. It's like losing their identity. Their identity has been to be miserable. And so they're stuck being miserable. They can't change what they want to change, and they don't want to change what they can change, Kierkegaard says. I'm sure there are people in therapy like that. And that's just a more sort of simple example. And that person might go through stages in which sort of temporarily they're very happy, I don't know, playing their computer games or surfing or whatever. But behind it all is this sense that their life is a total disaster. Any question about that? Okay, then let me see where we are. I think I keep thinking there's something more to say about this eternal, but probably there isn't. If somebody asks a question, they'll probably point me to where I'm missing something. Yeah. That's a wonderful question. I don't know. That is very interesting. Let me think about that. I think well, no, I have to think more. Yeah. Yes. Oh, absolutely. See, in her case, it looks like her despair of utter sadness starts at the moment she takes up resignation as the way to deal with the death of the German. And before that, it looks like what? We might want to say she was blissfully happy, but the trouble with that is it certainly won't, Kierkegaard won't like that. And because he says you can't be blissfully happy until you've been in despair and been cured of it. She hasn't got the imagination to think of what would happen if she lost the German. But lots of people like that, Kierkegaard says, that don't have that only get this problem of the loss of the other person when it becomes a dire necessity, as he puts it. The other person's just already dead. So what was her state of mind before? No. I think that's wonderful to have something to think about like that. Yeah.
pretty different? Is it different from like someone who doesn't know the family, or
What the? Sure, I don't know, but let's talk. I'm not gonna, unless that's going to help me understand her. I mean, the despair oughtn't to be different once she has understood that she's. I think probably. Did I? I say still on. I think what you have to do is try to realize that Kierkegaard didn't need the strong claim he was making. And then we have to sort of fix him up. I mean, nothing falls apart in his position if we understand that by the time she's got herself into this state of resignation, she's in despair, and she understands that her whole life from there on, from the moment the German was killed on, has been hopeless. But that's easy. What does she understand about the life before? That it was terrific, that she was happy. I'm really puzzled. Yeah. That's what Kierkegaard would say, but why should we think so? Here she got a defining commitment. Okay, good. I see your point. She's saying, well, but wouldn't she realize that even when she was happy, seemingly happy with the German, that was illusory. She was in despair and she didn't know it. Well, that's what Kierkegaard claims. That's what we'd like to show, but you can't just assert it. You've got to, so what would it look like for her to be in despair while she was happy with the German? That's half the question. And how does it look to her now? Does she now think that her time with the German was miserable? I don't think so. So it isn't as if now she's in despair. She ought to discover that she'd always been in despair. I'm just groping to understand this. Let's see now. She's always been in despair in a very remote way, which I could explain, but I don't, and I will, but I'm not convinced it's strong enough. I mean, she obviously was related to the German in a way that put her sort of to the vulnerability of this resignation, which is a kind of despair. She certainly wasn't related to him in the right night of faith way, where she saw the sword over the head of the beloved and loved as if it was the surest thing of all. She just didn't think about the fact that the German might die. All she thought about is she'd go to Bavaria with him. Now, that means that she was sort of potentially in despair, exposed to the possibility of despair, because she had this defining commitment and she had the wrong way of dealing with it. But that's hardly strong enough to say that that her life wasn't working then. Her life was set up in a way that in the end it wasn't going to work for her, because she didn't have faith. But it's hard for me to get any content to that. I mean, how did it feel at the point that she was with the German? Surely she had, you have to say, if you're Kierkegaard, well, her sense that it wasn't working was way covered up by how much fun she was having with the German. But that just doesn't feel right to me. I'm stumped. Nobody have any help? Yeah. Oh, but that was sort of fun. When you see that in the movie, she's running there on her bicycle, all happy and excited, and it's just part of the. I mean, they didn't feel that it was an evil thing they were doing, and so they had to hide it. They felt it was a good thing, but the time was evil, and so they had to hide it. Uh, I'm just gonna. I just don't know what. I mean, my temptation is to go out on a limb and say that there's a there's a place for some kind of situation where somebody hasn't yet realized that their way of life won't work. They haven't realized it unconsciously and covered it up. They just haven't realized it at all. And you can call that despair if you want to, but it's now got a funny thing because it seems so remote from the sense that things aren't working and will never work, which is the real feeling of despair. I'm getting nowhere. Yeah.
So looking down, she found that he was going to die.
Yes. Yeah, that's the best you can do, I think. What that feels like, I don't really know. It isn't, it somehow feels odd to say that I was under an illusion covering this up because it never would have seemed to have occurred to her. And therefore to say she was in despair is very sort of weak thing to say about her, namely that she was living in a way that once he died, her life was ruined. And therefore she was sort of vulnerable to despair all along. That's what you're really saying, and that's enough. That is despair, to be vulnerable to despair. Then she should retroactively realize that not only her life hasn't worked since the German died, but her life wasn't even working while the German was around. And I don't get any sense that she did realize that, or that she should realize that. Help.
A deeper root, like a more universal root than just the fact that the German died for like it's not working in that sense. Because if everyone is in despair, not everyone has this experience of having a defining commitment not working. And that's not necessarily.
Good. Well, then we would have to figure out what her kind was. That's why I gave you the example of the person who doesn't want to live in the future because they want to change the past. That was supposed to illustrate something which I didn't make clear. I mean, everybody's got some way of taking a stand on the factors which denies the contradiction or fails to resolve the contradiction. But there has to be some specific way. It's true that the factors are such that there is no right way to relate to them by yourself that would get them together. Satisfy one side or the other. That's right. But I'm just trying to get the feel for what it's like to feel that the factors couldn't be gotten together in your particular life, in your particular style of taking a stand on them, and that you never had them together and you couldn't possibly get them together. And even looking back on it, you can see that you were failing to get them together. That's what I concretely don't get. Okay, some people, I'm glad everybody's trying to help. This is amazing to find a new puzzle. Every year there's got to be some new puzzle. Yeah.
Could it be that later she realizes she was in despair the whole time they were together? Because after he dies, she realizes that that's the highest form of existence to her, and she never reached it while he was alive. Like, she never had a defining commitment.
But no, I don't think that's true to it looks to me like she did have a defining commitment to him while he was living. Otherwise, why would she go into this total grief and this turning him into this ideal thing which she had to keep, or else her life would be meaningless? It just doesn't seem to me to fit the picture. I mean, she just fully, devotedly involved in love with him, ready to go where he wants to go and ready to think they're going to live the whole rest of their lives together, and that's going to be fine. Now, I don't know what more you need to think that she had a defining commitment to him, except to see the vulnerability and worry about it, because Kierkegaard admits, this is the way his objection sort of gets into Kierkegaard and worries me and should worry Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard admits that you can be in a defining commitment and not be aware of the sword hanging over the head, not be aware of the vulnerability, therefore not needing to have faith, not thinking when you're getting more and more involved with anguish that you're doing something crazy. I mean, once you get all that in there, you're saved. But if you don't have all that, then I don't know why, I don't see why that person should be said to be in despair. I think I should go back to the drawing board and bring you a report if I get any further. Or you can come to office hours and tell me about it, and either at this one or afterward. I just think that's wonderful. It's very good to have hard problems like this. We'll learn something if we ever get it figured out. We may learn Kierkegaard just makes a mistake, that he can't make the strong claim he's making about despair, or we'll learn that he does get it right and I'm making a mistake. Either way, it'll be illuminating. Okay, let's go on. Now, so despair is a world-defining and eternal experience. It's like the negative version of a defining commitment. And people who discover that their whole life has been meaningless and hasn't worked no matter how much fun they were thinking they were having. You'd have to think that your happiness was illusory, looking back. And you'd have to see you've never been happy and you never could be happy. And, okay. Now we're on to the next issue. Then the next issue is how come this is the way we are built? That we're built, looking at your chart, with these two sets of factors, which are contradictory and can't be gotten together, either by denying one or the other, which will certainly not get them together, which is the Greek way, or by holding on to both of them, which can't get them together because there's no way to be detached and involved, infinite and finite, temporal and eternal, all at the same time, just on your own. And that makes, remember, of course, but there is a way to do it, all right, and that's on the other side, just to remind you, because there's so many things in the air right now, the middle of the long thing. So what is it to get out of despair? Maybe this is a moment to say that first. Are you really stuck in despair? Not if you get the relation to relate itself. If you relate to yourself, or the relation relates itself to itself, that is, you take a stand on being these factors in a way that, what? You tell me, what do you have to add to get it to work? You can't do it by yourself. What does it take to do it? To get the factors together? To be finite and infinite, temporal and eternal, possible and necessary, all at the same time. You all know this, I hope, or I should go home. What? Faith. Well, faith is a part of it. Faith is a part of it, all right. What is it that you have to do that requires faith? To put your question back one step. You have to what? Yes, you have to relate yourself to yourself by relating to another, something or other. That's the middle paragraph on this page 1. If the relation which relates itself to itself has been constituted by another, then of course the relation is the third term, and the relation, skipping a little, relates to that which has established the whole relation. So you have to relate yourself to yourself by relating to another, and relating to another not just in any old way, but with infinite passion as a defining commitment. And then that creates you as a new being, gives you an identity, you get an infinite passion for something finite. You get it in time, you get something that in your life is forever. And with necessity, that with something fixed in your life, you can then have both being fixed, something settled, and a lot of possibilities up for unsettled. All that happens, but only happens if you relate yourself to yourself by relating to another. And then comes her point from back there. And how do you do that? Well, there are all kinds of wrong ways to do it, fanatically, and resign it with resignation. But there's one right way to do it, and that's what? Seeing the sword over the head of the beloved and do what? Love anyway, defenselessly, more and more as if it was the surest thing of all. And what do you need to be able to do that? Faith. You have to believe that even the impossible is possible, that this relation is absolutely secure and totally vulnerable. And if you believe that, you believe something utterly incomprehensible. That's the paradox of existence. If you try to say, in terms of beliefs, what the Knight of Faith is doing, you have to say, well, look at that. The Knight of Faith believes that this is absolutely secure and absolutely vulnerable. And the Knight of Faith has to say that to himself if he thinks about it. But he can do something he can't understand if he has faith. He can do something paradoxical. That's it. Then the two parts of the self will be related, and everything will be okay. That's the cure the sickness unto death is a disease, a special kind of dialectical or eternal or whatever kind of disease, and the cure for that kind of disease is unconditional commitment in a field of faith. Okay, that's where we are. So Christianity, and now comes this interesting issue, that Christianity, I think, I don't know if Kierkegaard thinks this, but I imagine he does, is in a certain sense the cause of the disease and the cure of it, where the disease is despair. Now, the tricky part, we've done the cure of it a lot. That's just what we just went through. It tells you to get a defining relation and that that faith will make it all work out fine. But in this, it's hard to know just to what extent Kierkegaard thinks this about. The question is, does the self always come with these two factors that have to be realized or else it's in despair? Even if you're a Buddhist, even if you're in Greece? Or I think he thinks that Christianity, I hope he thinks, that Christianity invented the problem. I mean, because Jesus was there, who was the God-man, who told people that they could have an infinite passion, should have, called them to have it. Then they discovered there was something like bliss, which is getting the two factors together. Nobody in the ancient world had bliss, according to Dante. The best they could do was limbo in the afterlife, where they wandered around and talked to each other and took it easy, and it was very pleasant. But bliss goes with despair. Only a view of the self, which is so amazingly contradictory and yet put togetherable, gives you the despair if you don't put it together, and bliss if you do. And where did you get this self? Is it just sort of biological? Given your DNA and mine, we all have these sets of factors? That seems very unlikely. What you get it because in our traditions, the Hebrews sort of set it up that the mind and the body are equally essential. And then God became man, meaning that Jesus went around saying that he was God and man, and showed somehow that you could be eternal and temporal and all that. And once you see it, that is, it's a little hard to follow this now, but somehow it gets put in the culture by the Christian community, and then the Romans become Christians. And in the background, a whole new understanding of how hard it is to be a human being and how terrific it is if you get it right. It's harder than any ancients thought, or the Buddhists thought, or anybody like that ever thought. And it's more blissful if you get it right than anybody ever thought. And that's the peculiar sense, I think, in which Christianity is the disease for which it is the cure. And now, that's probably what it means to talk about when you relate yourself to another. That is, relates yourself to what has established the whole relation. That's the same thing as the phrase, you're grounded transparently in the power that constituted the self. These are just two different translations of the same idea. So Jesus, I think you have to think, established this complicated kind of self. It's like discovering that there's something that you really, really like, but you never noticed you really, really liked it. But once you discover you really, really liked it, you discover you can't live without it. And then you're both in trouble, but that's also a great new exciting thing. Well, if you just imagine that now pushed to the limit, there is something called bliss that you discover that you can have. And once you discover you can have it, you get to be a bliss addict. And everybody in the culture is a bliss addict, either because they're directly raised as Christians and told all this story, or because it's all over in the literature, it's in the language, it's in the history of the culture, in this peculiar sense. And everybody raised in the West anyway, and only maybe, it has this kind of factors. It's been established by what? Well, I think by Jesus. I mean, if it's true that he's the first one to come around and say, you can have an unconditional commitment, which gives you bliss and brings you together, and doesn't make you choose, like, remember the Greeks do, either let's satisfy the body part, or let's satisfy the soul part. This thing doesn't make you choose. It says you're essentially body and soul. You're essential, and you can have both, even though they're contradictory. Then you see that there is some sense in which, on this Kierkegaard picture, Jesus has got to be the power that posited it, and posited this kind of self by saying have an unconditional, and by what now? There's one little piece more missing, I think. I'm just sort of trying to make up the story that I think Kierkegaard must have, though I can't give you any pages where he has it. I see I never turned on the lights back there. I don't know if it matters, but it makes me happy to have them on. There. Now, there are two ways, I think, that you can relate to the God-man. Oh, no, I want to say one more thing. Good, I don't want to skip it. Kierkegaard realizes that he's got no argument, no rational argument, no scientific argument for claiming that we are a self made out of two contradictory factors. He gets it from reading the Bible. And the whole Bible, the Old Testament, but particularly the New Testament. And he calls these books that are written in by the highest Christian person, like Sickness Unto Death, dogmatic. Dogmatic, now, since the Enlightenment, dogmatic has come to mean a bad thing. You ought to be able to give good arguments for everything and not just go around and say that's how it is. When Kierkegaard says dogmatic, he means he knows it by way of the revelation that's in the Bible, and there's no other way to know it. There's no rational way to know it. You can't prove it with biology. You can't prove it by arguments like metaphysicians try to do, and so forth. You either got the revelation or you, in a certain way, you could say either you believe it or you don't, but I think in a certain way everybody believes it once they're in it. Once we're in this culture. We may outgrow it. Nietzsche, you'll see, is trying very hard to help us outgrow it. He doesn't think it's a good idea to be bliss addicts. But while you're in it, anyway, it's the revelation tells you you're in it, and he doesn't claim to do anything but explain that revelation. Now I think there's only one more piece to be put into that, and that is, well, and how do you relate to Jesus? What is it to be transparently grounded in that something which established the relation? And he doesn't even want to say God. He wants to say something very, very general. But somehow or other, something or other, established the self the way it is. And Jesus seems to be the one who did it. So now how do you relate to Jesus? Well, there seem to be two ways. I've been sort of telling you one, but I think I should tell you both. I've sort of told you both. And I don't know which one Kierkegaard is for. Maybe he thinks they're both okay. I think that's what he thinks. If you're a disciple, a contemporary of Jesus, you can have an unconditional relation to Jesus. And then you've got a big risk, because he might get crucified and he might even despair on the cross and give up the whole mission, and it might look like he was never a savior at all. It's a very risky business to be a contemporary of Jesus. And but if you've got faith, you can do it. And that's one possibility. I think the other the one I think that Kierkegaard is more interested in, because we're not disciples, and we can't sort of lose Jesus and be shocked by the fact that he despairs on the cross, and we betray him like Peter afterward, and all this kind of complicated things that happen. It's all over. I mean, we can't help but see it from this end where we are. So that probably is not the way we should be behaving. Well, Kierkegaard, in the second of the books where he signs them with his highest Christian name, says Jesus is the paradigm. That means he's the perfect example of something. I've always thought, well, Jesus shows people what it is to be able to die for your friend, as he puts it. Yeah, committed to somebody. Oh, but maybe, and I think that's what Kierkegaard thinks. But then you get into the funny question, but boy, you read the Bible, you don't find much about Jesus going around taking on a risky unconditional commitment. What's his risky unconditional commitment? Not enough, just any old friend. I mean, it would have to be a friend like Augustine's friend, where your whole world and your identity is tied up with that friend, and that you don't hear about any such friend. Yeah.
Don't see the struggling with an unusual commitment, because there's this whole big section in the Bible missing where they're like his adolescents. You don't know anything about that. I mean, I was traditionally the time when you like struggle with what am I going to be in the world.
Oh, you're on my wavelength, but I want to go a little further. I used to say, well, I bet Jesus is some kind of freedom fighter, fighting for, Israeli independence from those Romans. And I used to think, of course, this is perfectly silly. There's nothing in the Bible that supports it. Now, to my amazement, there's a whole industry of Christian theologians arguing that he was, and giving arguments like, if you know the Bible, is it Peter who cuts off the ear of one of the Romans who comes to capture you? Well, as they say, what is Peter, who's supposed to be non-aggressive? I never can remember the word. A passive resistance kind of Christian. That was Jesus's way, turn the other cheek. What is this turn the other cheek person doing with a sword, carrying it around and cutting off an ear from the Roman? And the other one that they talk a lot about is this funny thing in the Bible, those of you who know it, that Jesus keeps saying things and then saying, but don't tell anybody. And as if maybe he's giving them some kind of code about where the next meeting is going to be or something, and saying, but you can understand this, but don't go around telling people who are not on our side. I mean, maybe. It isn't as if something you have to believe, and it isn't something this course requires, but it seems to me it's a missing piece. If Jesus is a paradigm, an outstanding example, then he ought to be someone taking a risky, unconditional commitment, and maybe it's such a secret sort of underground operation that it doesn't show up very clearly in what the people are writing down, which becomes the New Testament. I think that would be very interesting. But it's clear, this is much as clear, that he became a paradigm, whether anybody knew what it was or not, that he was committed to, because Dante's way of relating to Beatrice, remember, puts Beatrice in the place of Jesus as Dante's savior, because you can have an unconditional commitment to anything, something. Remember the dog last time. I remembered, by the way, that she also wouldn't wear belts or fur or anything. I mean, this woman who had this unconditional commitment to her dog, to everything that was important to her got related to it. That's fine, because the paradigm, according to Kierkegaard, would be that there was something finite for which you had an infinite passion. And there was something, presumably, that Jesus had an infinite passion for, but we just don't know what. So either you have an infinite passion for him, or you imitate him, and he had an infinite passion for something else. That creates you as a contradictory self, and then that gives you the solution. What it is transparently grounded in the power that established you as a set of factors. Let me tell you why I'm telling you all this. Because I told you a simpler version last time I talked about it, and I decided that was just wrong, and I have to tell you the complicated truth as I see it. I mean, I said that what you get when you get a defining commitment is it creates you as the individual you are. And that's the sense in which you are transparently grounded in everything you do in the power that posited you as an individual. But that's not really what Kierkegaard says. It's the self that got posited, the two factors. That you're transparently grounded in the power that posited it, not the power that posited you. And the it is who created the self with the contradictory factors. Now somehow you can be transparently grounded in that which established the relation, as he puts it, established itself or been established by something else. Okay, so the self gets created by the something. That's the story I just tried to tell you. It's not enough that what your defining commitment creates you as an individual. That your defining commitment is tied up with the fact that you've been created as a self with two essential factors that you can't get rid of either one, and you can't get them together by yourself. All that got established somehow, and I'm just trying to give you a story about how it got established. It's so different, by the way. I keep coming back every once in a while to Buddhism because my son has become now a very, very religious Buddhist, and he argues with me all the time in a nice way and gives me all kinds of metaphysical arguments about how to be a good Buddhist. But one thing is sure, he's not interested in taking a risky commitment to anything. Non-attachment is absolutely crucial to his way of thinking of things, because every kind of attachment will lead to suffering. And I said, well, don't you want to be committed to your job and find it really very interesting and fulfilling and so important you can't live without it? And he said, no, of course not, because then if you lose your job, you'll suffer. And so there's a whole other picture of what it is to be a self, in which you want to get rid of the involvement side of the self in order to avoid suffering and get some other kind of bliss. I don't know what kind of bliss, a bliss that doesn't come with anguish and so forth. But it's not something. So if you ask yourself, does Kierkegaard think the Buddhists are in despair? I think the answer is no. He doesn't think they're in the bliss and despair business. They're in something else. But we, he thinks, are in despair. Yeah. The Buddhists, he might argue that, right? From within our world, they are missing something important. Now, and I think he would say that because we've had a revelation which shows us that there are possibilities for the self beyond what they can see. He would say that. From within the revelation, dogmatically, it has to look that way to us. It would be that they're missing something. And therefore, we would have to say they were in lower immediacy. Right. And we, I guess then, I think I see what you're up to then rightly, we would have to say they would be in despair, or else we'd have to say, and I think that's what Dante would say, they just missed out on something. And that has the disadvantage that they don't feel bliss, but it has the advantage that they don't feel despair either. And we can see that and say that. Dante, as a good Christian, as I say, puts all the pagans, and if he knew the Buddhists, he'd put them there too, in limbo, which is neither hell nor paradise, and so forth. So anyway, you could take a view that we know they're missing something, but that doesn't mean that they can't have their own kind of fulfillment. The Greeks did, and the Buddhists do, and it would be, from our point of view, despair, because they're missing this much more super version. But and we have to say that. That's what we believe. I think that's what I believe anyway when I argue with my son. But they will say, no, you're all wrong. You got yourself into this huge tangle of bliss and anguish and despair. And there is another form of life and meditation which will get you some kind of full experience without all that hang up. And there's no place where you can stand, I think, and say, well, they're just wrong. You can just be dogmatic. We're back to that again. You can say, if you live in the revelation and believe in the revelation and are formed by the revelation, they're certainly going to look wrong to you. Yeah.
In despair, obviously they were raised.
That's fascinating. You hear her question. I mean, would if you became a Buddhist, if you'd been raised in the West, would you be in despair? I think so. But my son certainly doesn't think so. And it's a tough one. I I don't know. I guess you know what I really think? Enough meditation and you can get out of it. I mean, after being alone for 10 hours, for 10 days, as he's done, but without seeing another human being or saying anything and meditating all the time, who knows what it does to your neurons? You may end up so much reborn that you're out of it. I think maybe okay.
Following that religion life, like what do you kind of have to?
And how? But is it a commitment to something vulnerable? Is it some commitment that you could lose in such a way as to have this devastating grief effect on your life? It could be a waste of your life because you could realize you were in lower immediacy. Yes, but you can't realize that from within it. I mean, it isn't as if, when you're in it, it looks safe enough. And if you were out of it, I guess I have to say everybody's sort of capable of being reborn as a Christian, with a Christian self, and and get a commitment and so forth. And then you would have discovered, then you would have looked like you were in despair all along when you were a Buddhist, say. But it isn't as if the Buddhism is on its own terms vulnerable. It isn't as if it sees the sword hanging over the head of Buddhism and then goes on as if it's the surest thing of all. This vulnerability story is a part of the finite temporal story, and they got rid of the finite temporal. They're only off in the eternal infinite dimension. Okay, let me, this is all interesting. Go ahead. Well, good. She says, can you think of Buddhism as repressing the finite body part? We can, inside the revelation, dogmatically think of it. But if I ask you, but what's your argument for thinking of it that way? You look inside people's heads or you make rational arguments. You can look at it that way, but that's only because you're inside this culture. Then you will look at it that way. You'll say, and that's what we did when we looked at the Greeks. You'll say, well, they're just denying that the one half of the self is essential, and they're saying the other half is essential. They get rid of the body, finite, temporal. That's all too risky and suffering. They identify with the eternal, infinite, possible, and that gives them a freedom from suffering and a certain kind of bliss. I don't know what their word for it is. And now the question, but back to you, were they repressing the other half of the self? Well, we think so. But they don't think so, and there's no position again from which to prove who's right. I believe it. That's right. They try to do something. I haven't been lectured enough yet by my son. They've given me more time. But they're trying to do something to the body part such that they will get some kind of special experience with the other part. And they think that's what it's all about. One way to put it, if you're having this discussion with any Buddhist friends, is he keeps telling me the right way to get over suffering. And I keep wanting to say to him, suffering isn't what it's all about. It's about meaning. And unconditional commitment is getting meaning in your life. And it's tied up with a great deal of possible grief and suffering and so forth. But it's worth suffering to get meaning. And he says, no, there's only one really important thing in the world, and that is you shouldn't suffer. And what do you say to that? Well, you say what view you have about that will depend on what language you've grown up in and what tradition and what sort of family and so forth. Yeah.
Culture. Are they,
she's asking about what about the people who want to break out of this whole bliss addiction and this unconditional commitment story. Well, you're getting ahead of the story, and they are atheists and they are nihilists. And they think that there must be something that is better than meaning and better than freedom from suffering. And guess who their leader is? Nietzsche. And we will get to Nietzsche. Nietzsche wants to break out of this, but he hates Buddhism as much as he hates Christianity. He's got his own new religion, which a lot of us are in now, because we're at this kind of transition between a culture, which was a religious culture, and a secular kind of culture. And so your question is fine, and of course we will get there. Anything else? Yeah. Logic? No, I certainly don't. It's funny. In fact, but you can't appreciate this. My son gives me these 4,000-year-old Buddhist arguments about space and time and how they're unreal and the objects are empty. And it sounds exactly like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I mean, you can get to this, apparently, by logic and rationality. You can get to Buddhism, or you can get to what Kant calls transcendental idealism. And it looks very similar. It's amazing. I think, this is just totally crazy probably, but it's certainly striking. It looks to me like it's no accident that the philosophy, either there's some really sort of innate way the mind works and logic and rationality just come out the same, whether you're doing it in Tibet or in Königsberg, Germany, or I think, in my opinion, having talked to my son and learned a lot from him, that we got this Buddhist thing straight out of Buddhism. Plato went away for a while, and Plato came to visit people who had something which people would talk about, the mystery religions. I don't know much about this, but I know this. Plato came back believing in the reincarnation of souls, and he didn't believe it when he left. And it's a totally basic Buddhist idea. And he came back believing in karma, though he didn't call it karma. He said that the souls, before they got re-put in a body, which was a bad thing for them, but it had to be done, before they got re-put in a body, the past life they had determined what life they chose for their next life. See, if you know Buddhism, that sounds very familiar. What they did and thought and so forth in one life is going to determine whether they get a better life next round or a worse life next round. Plato got that. Where did he get that all of a sudden? I think he got it from the Buddhists. And then you get all sorts of further things, which I won't go into, that Plato's got. Once you believe that there's this other world, and he certainly thinks that getting stuck with the body is a kind of suffering, and you should die to the body as much as possible, and so forth. So it may not be an accident that if you do philosophy, lots of the arguments that come up look like they come from the Buddhists. I don't know. Yeah. Aha. Very good question. Is my son the Buddhist the one who plays with? The answer is yes and no. He was, but he isn't anymore. It's only happened over the last year. He was addicted to computer games. He was, I just want to go into all the family tale. His life was a certain paradigm mess. And after a year of Buddhism and meditating and doing all these things that he's doing, he's completely clean of computer games and everything else. He's a super kid. What? Maybe a year and a half. But boy, has he thrown himself into it. He studies courses. He goes off to their retreats all by himself for 10 days. He gives up wine. He gives up meat. It's not trivial. And apparently you can change. I'm amazed how much you can change a person if they find sort of the religion that's what they need. He was so. He, as long as we're putting all the family laundry out, he's the one who feels that his childhood was so miserable that unless we can change it, he was not going to do anything in the future that could make us happy. And now he's given up that attitude, and he loves to make us happy. And he sends email remembering far off things in the past where he feels he did something that hurt us, and he apologizes. We don't even remember. Okay. That's an ad for Buddhism. I give you an ad for Christianity now and an ad for Buddhism. But I saw another hand. Well, okay, yeah. Falls in love. Well, I wish I would. I'm eagerly waiting to see. Maybe I'll bring you a report by the end of the semester. I don't think Buddhists fall in love, and at least certainly not in the romantic way we do, because there'd be suffering. But they do something together and get married and have kids. So I don't know what to make of that yet. He'll give me lectures on it when the time comes. Okay, I want to go back to what I call leftover issues. And the main leftover issue, this comes by office hours where 10, 12 people were beating up on me over mainly the hard thing to understand what God is in all this. And first thing I want to tell you is don't worry about it. And don't get all hung up about it in your papers. It's the phenomena that matters. Remember when Kierkegaard says the lad is in love with the princess and he can't have her, and it's about this that everything turns. That's the phenomena of all we've talked about: unconditional commitments, risk, resignation, faith, and so forth. But Kierkegaard is also trying to map his Regina experience onto this phenomenology of the lad and the princess, the sort of romantic love story, and it doesn't always work very well. But I'll try to tell you how I see it, and try to put it together as best I can. So there's this problem of God is there is something called the absolute, and Abraham has an absolute relation to the absolute, which tells him to sacrifice Isaac. Now, Kierkegaard doesn't say this absolute is God. Kierkegaard doesn't say anything about God in Fear and Trembling, as far as I know, except that relating to God with love, like the Silentio does, is a kind of despair and is the wrong thing to do. But there are a lot of sort of godlike something or others running around in the book. And one of them is the absolute relation to the absolute. And then you get the puzzle that people say, but how can anything trump the unconditional commitment? How could there be this absolute coming in and saying, you have to sacrifice Isaac, you have to lose Isaac, you have to go against the ethical? Where does this get the authority to say those things if the unconditional commitment is the highest authority in your life? And Beatrice is your God person. Who can come in? How could anybody come in and say to Dante, you have to sacrifice Beatrice? And certainly Beatrice isn't going to say so. Well, then you have to think about it this way, I believe. God is something like, there is some force, and I don't think it helps to call it God, but this absolute is that tells him to sacrifice Isaac, is the absolute opponent of his absolute commitment. That is, the absolute commitment comes up against something which says, you've got to be ready to give up Isaac. You've got to live in such a way that you can give up Isaac. That doesn't come from his absolute commitment. That's the only thing that his absolute commitment can't trump. God there, the absolute that's making him sacrifice Isaac, is the sword hanging over the head of the beloved. It's the absolute fact that if you get committed to something finite, you're at the mercy of the vulnerableness of it. And that's the role, as far as I can see, that this absolute relation to the absolute, forcing Abraham to face the fact that you've got to be prepared to sacrifice Isaac. That's what it's better amount to. He better accept, that is Abraham, and integrate in his life the impossibility of a safe, stable, defining relation to whatever. Because there is no such thing as a safe, stable, defining relation. There's always the risk. And God is, or this absolute force, is the risk. Now, but there's more puzzling things which I want to talk about. How in the world can this absolute say that you should give up your defining relation? Not just that it could be taken away from you, but somehow there's an authority in your life that says You have to get rid of it right now. I mean, Abraham has to sacrifice Isaac right now, and Kierkegaard has to sacrifice Regina right now, that is, break his engagement. This is the anti-ethical part. I mean, that's different than the absolute coming in and saying Isaac might die is one thing. The absolute coming in and saying, you have to do it. You have to break with your defining relation. What could ever tell you that? Your defining relation is the most important thing in your life. How could it or anything else tell you you have to break with your defining relation? Well, then I think it gets really murky, but in a very interesting way. You have to ask, well, what's the phenomenon? Well, it looks like there's some higher, truer calling Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but for what? One doesn't know. And Kierkegaard is sacrificing Regina for what? And he doesn't know. And it looks like what this is about, although Kierkegaard never says so, or I think wouldn't even admit it, is that it's saying you don't really have a defining commitment to Regina. There is something else that's calling you, some other destiny that you don't know yet, but it's already telling you, don't get involved with Regina. If you get married and have a wife and lots of kids, you won't be able to fulfill your calling. And something's calling Abraham, because he's trying always to complete this parallel, who is telling him, yeah, Isaac is important and being father of the faith is important, but something else you need to be true to is even more important. But certainly Abraham doesn't know what it is. But never mind Abraham. This is just a story. I think it's important that Kierkegaard doesn't know what it is. And there is some kind of phenomena like that. It's another case of doing what you can't understand. It's a special weird case of giving up what seems to be your identity in order to find out who you really are. It's something Kierkegaard can't really touch and deal with in here, but it's in the background somehow. By that I mean, Kierkegaard's going to turn out to be the greatest Christian theologian since, Luther, if he was a theologian. I mean, he's a very, very important thinker. He had a big deal mission. All existentialist stuff comes from him. And I don't think he could have done it with a bunch of kids running around, and so forth. He was doing something he didn't understand. He was giving up something which he felt was his defining relation, but he was doing it in a way which, if you look at it from later, which you're not allowed to do, remember, because he wasn't living later. But if you looked at it from later, you'd see Kierkegaard was really being called by a calling which trumped what looked like his other calling. I think that's how you have to think about it. And now let's see what else. I think maybe that's what I want to say. Yeah, all these other things have come up in the discussion anyway. Let me just keep looking at this. A whole other issue. 4 minutes. I'll just touch on it. Can you have a defining commitment to the ethical? That came up a lot. That's a tough one. After having been beaten on for a while about that, I have a new idea, which I will run fast by you, that there are two different kinds of ethical. There's the Greek ethical. Agamemnon can't have a defining commitment to the ethical because being king is a role, and doing the ethical thing is a job that anybody could and should do who was king. And you can't get an individual definition out of doing your job as king. But since the Greeks didn't know anything about being individual, according to Kierkegaard, it's not a problem. Agamemnon did what he was supposed to do. He subsumed one ethical under a higher ethical and did his job as king. The issue comes with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is a very interesting, complicated case. When I introduced him into the discussion early on, it was as if, look at this guy, he's got an unconditional commitment, he's ready to die for justice for the black people here in the United States and now. And that's still right. That's exactly what he's doing. But what's interesting about it is, it's sort of ethical, too. And I didn't mention that. Because what Martin Luther King is doing is intelligible. He's not it would look like, in the anguish of doing something absolutely disgusting, but he's doing something terrific. So he's not a good example, right off, of anybody going against the ethical, although he's a good example of having an unconditional commitment to something. Yeah. No, because, that's the right question. Is he a tragic hero? No, because there's something non-universal and individual about what he's doing. It's a category Kierkegaard didn't work out. I would like to give it as a paper topic, but I think it's too hard. Martin Luther King felt not that he was a king, in the sense of Agamemnon king, he was a prophet. And prophets are called as individuals to do something now to the people. And there's a lot of unintelligibility in it. Why does it have to be Martin Luther King who does it? Why does it have to be done now? Why do you have to take the risk of killing white kids from the north to help the people in Alabama? It's sort of intelligible because he wants justice, and that's intelligible. But how he's going about getting this justice has a lot of unintelligibility in it. But, and this is the last thought on it, it's still something that he is not in anguish about. Because in the last talk before he's killed, remember, he says, I've been on the mountain and I've seen the promised land. That's prophet talk. But that says the future will show me to be right. And remember, Kierkegaard says his night of faith, suspending the ethical, can't say that. So where is Martin Luther King? Well, he's kind of a Christian ethical. He's more unintelligible than Agamemnon and more individual than Agamemnon. But he is still intelligible to himself, and he thinks he understands his mission, and people understand him in terms of his mission. Yeah, I don't have more to say about that, except I think I owed you an attempt to explain why Martin Luther King sort of works in the course and sort of doesn't. Okay.